Right, the first part of this here tutorial thing is a demonstration of how to get a heavy US freight train on a simulator moving. It doesn't really matter what simulator you're using, whether it's Train Sim World 2, Run 8, Train Sim, maybe even Trains, who knows? Somebody must use it. But these techniques, maybe the buttons will be different, but these techniques will apply across the board. And they work for me. I'm not a US train driver, however I believe this is sort of what they do. What I'm doing now is I'll pick the simulator that basically has a visual aid so you can see exactly what's happening to the whole train, not just what's going on in your locomotive. So at the moment all I'm doing is I'm on a pretty damn steep upgrade. I've got a heavy 5,000 or 6,000 ton train, about 5,000 feet long if I remember right, hauled by 4 engines, ES44s and SD70s I think. And you can see on the displays at the front, which are pretty similar in Train Sim World. This is not Train Sim World, but you can see if you look at the displays, if you look at either of the screens, top left hand side you'll see the brakes, you've got the equaliser and reservoir, you've got the brake pressure underneath that, both with bar graphs. Below those you have the brake cylinder, which is the pressure of the brakes in the locomotives. You can see that building now slowly. To the right of that you can see the pressure in the main reservoir. Every time you use the brakes that will drop, which will mean you'll have less braking the next time you try until it has a chance to rebuild the pressure. To the right of that you have the pressure at the rear of the train in the reservoir, and then you have the flow through the brake lines as you're recharging the brakes. Those are the important numbers and the 2 blue graphs. What you have to the right of the display, to the right of the speedo, is the amount of amps that you're driving into the wheels, so the amount of force on the wheels. You have the reverser, whether it's in neutral N, forward F or reverse R. To the right of that, I can't quite read it in the resolution of the display, I think that's the amps. And then something else to the right of that that I can't read out. That's the throttle position, which at the moment's in idle. There you go, I've just put it into notch 1. What I'm doing now is I'm putting a bit of forward power on and allowing the engines to run up to the power I want them to use. If you look at the top of the screen, top left, this is why I'm using this simulator, because you can see what's happening all the way along the train. You'll see 4 E's that are now purple, and then double dots in a line running along the train. The top row of dots, which are all white, show the strain on the couplers. If the couplers are in tension, so if the train's pulling apart, they will go from yellow to orange to red to dark red, and then the coupler will break. If you've got the brakes on at the front of the train going down a hill and all the couplers are being compressed and pushed together, then it'll go through greens, blues, dark blues, to show you how much compression is on the couplers. The bottom row, which is a very dark purple at the moment, almost black on this display, that is showing you how much pressure is in the brakes on each of the wagons in your train. So you can see they're all pretty dark coloured, so I've added quite a lot of automatic brake now. They're now dropping back to white as I've released the automatic brake, so they're going back and they will go to white once the brakes are fully released. What you see is happening now is that all the wagons, because I've released all the brakes, all the cars in the train have run back down the hill and put tension on the whole train now. I've got the independent brakes, so the locomotive brakes, on full, holding the train still, together with the power that I've applied. You've got the strain of all the wagons trying to roll backwards down the hill, putting some tension on the couplers, but not too much. What I'm now doing is I'll get the power level to where I think I've got enough to start moving forwards. I've got a green light, so I can start heading off. Double honk means I'm about to move forwards. Automatic brakes release, and now what I'm doing is slowly, if you look at the BC box, I'm slowly releasing the independent brake. This commentary isn't live commentary, by the way. I'm watching what I did when I did this yesterday and commenting on it. So I've almost released the independent brake now, and I'm still not moving, so at least I'm not rolling backwards, which is something. Okay, the independent brake's almost completely released. If you look at the visual indicator thing up at the top, you'll see those 4 E's which represent the locomotives. Now that that's white, their air brakes are all off. Look down at the screens again, you'll see the EOT move light has lit, which means that the back of the train's moving somewhere. It's rolling backwards or rolling forwards. I think because I'd already let the train stretch out, I'm now moving the rear of the train forward. So all the couplers are in tension, so I've got a nice steady train, and I can slowly start applying power without snatching and without breaking any couplers. So I'll gradually, notch by notch, add to the power now that I'm rolling, and that's how you pull away. That's an awful lot of power applied now, 1200 amps. One more click and I will be needing the sanders to give me a bit more traction. As the train starts to move, you'll see that the amps will start to drop back, and you can then apply a bit more throttle. Now if you look at the speedo, you'll see that green mark shows that the green pointer shows that I'm accelerating. It's in front of the white speedo. The white one's the speed I'm actually doing. And if the green one drops below the white one, it turns yellow and it shows me that I'm slowing down. The same technique works just as well in TSW or TSW2. You can see, if you look at the visual aid thing at the top of the screen, every now and again, whenever I apply another notch of power, just behind the engines it goes a very dark red, which means quite close to actually breaking that coupler. And if you break the coupler, everything comes to a stop, the emergency brakes come on, and you have to repair the couplers, recouple the train, and then try and set off again. It's a right pain. In real life, it's worse, because those couplers are heavy and you've got to walk all the way down the train to wherever you broke it. So I'm accelerating up this grade. This hill stays just as steep all the way up. It's a fairly short run. I'm only going from one passing loop to the next passing loop. So there's probably only a mile or so to go. And then I'll be bringing the train to a halt and moving on to part 2 of this little demo. If you look at that hill ahead, just underneath the crucifix, you will see the track that we will be going around on, because this is a loop. We're going into the Tehachapi loop. And that's where we will be stopping. Double yellows, so an approach signal. Or is that a distant approach? I don't know. Something like that. tired and my brain's not working. This isn't that far from Mojave, so it's I think one of the reasons the vegetation looks so sparse is it's sort of on the edge of being a desert and quite high up. But it'll never be as pretty as TSW2 because TSW2 is an awful lot newer. But it doesn't have a nice little handy visual aid. You can see, even though I'm at full throttle, now that I've got 20 odd mile an hour on, I'm nowhere near the nasty red colours on that lead coupler. The train's nice, steady and relaxed-ish for a 2-degree upslope. Red at the top, yellow at the bottom means diverging. So not only sort of in approach, preview's frozen. So we'll be taking the right off this main line into the passing loop. Wallong, which is a detachable loop. I hope this is recording the voice okay, because Norton's decided it's going to do an antivirus scan just to help on an old and low power computer. I'm not really sure of the ideal technique for bringing a heavy train to a halt on a steep upgrade. So you can see what I did, and feel free to comment if I did it wrong, but at least I came to a stop without rolling back too much. And I didn't break the train, so I must have got something right. That's the back end of our train. We're now running in a spiral, and we're about to run over ourselves. And I think shortly after running over ourselves, we have to indulge the US Railways honking ceremony. Thou shalt honk any second. Basically, at any crossing, 2 longs, 1 short, and then a long that you maintain the honk until you've crossed the crossing. Right, so I'm cutting the power off. We're on a steep upgrade, so the train's slowing anyway. But I don't want it to roll back, and I don't want it to roll forward too far. So at some stage, very shortly, I'll be applying some. Just watch and see what I do. There we go. There's the automatic brake. You can see it. If you look at the visual aid, you can see it applying throughout the train. Running back along the train. And you can see that I've actually got quite a bit of tension on the couplers. That tension, if I remember right, I bail off the brakes and the locos and they run back a little bit and it clears that tension. And then again I might have cut that bit short. It was getting dragging on a bit. Right, part 2 of the video. Going downhill. We're at the top, we're at Cajon. Not sure how you pronounce it. We're headed towards San Bernardino. There's a lot of trains in front of us. It's nose to tail. I'll let a logjam build up. But it's just gone from 2 reds to a red and an amber, so I know the track ahead's clear. So I've released the brakes, little bit of power. I'm not trying to start on a big gradient, so there's nothing fancy required, just a little bit of power. This is a different train. It's an ST70 Ace, 4 on the front. There's another something or other at the back of the train. It's a longer, heavier train, and we're going on a steep downgrade. So this is the art of holding a train back. So we're not on the downgrade yet. This bit's relatively flat. This is the summit basically. So I'm just gradually accelerating, building the power. No great shocks in the length of the train. If you look at the visual aid at the top, you might see that the locomotive at the back's pushing. So it's pushing the back few wagons forward, and then there's tension at the forward part of the train. It's sort of yellowy. The greying is the compression. Now this Cajon is double track. You've got 2 different routes. We're on the steepest because we're going down. The shallower grade is for the returning train from San Bernardino heading for Barstow. It's got a bit more of a loop to it. It takes a shallower path. And we'll see that. And then later on in the video, after I've done the braking tutorial, running to the end of the route at high, I've compressed the speed and things just to get the route over within about an hour of video. I'll let the whole thing run, starting and stopping, the whole works, and you will see the Union Pacific line coming in from the right. You'll see trains queuing up on that as well. I really let a good logjam build up on purpose to give me something to look at when I was playing, like I am now. So what's happening? We are rolling, we've got no throttle on, we're ready to engage a dynamic brake. It's just ready to, it's configured for dynamic braking. I just haven't applied any as yet. Speed's holding pretty steady because we're on the flat. We haven't hit the downslope yet, but I'm ready for it. It's not going to surprise me, maybe. Right, here you have us going down the steep bit. You've got the shallow bit coming up, and then joining that, you'll see another line filtering off to the right, and that goes up to join the UP line, which comes in from the right a bit higher up. So we've just passed Summit. This is whatever it's called, I've forgotten the name of it. Yeah, couldn't quite read that. But this is the top of the steep bit. It's freight, there's no timetable. Last thing you want is it to run away and derail. So you don't hurry if you're approaching the steep downgrade. With without any power, it's starting to accelerate now, so now the front of the train's now on the downgrade. Now, if it was longer or heavier, you'd actually see tension in the train if you looked at that visual display thing up at the top. And it's not quite extreme enough to really show up. Speed limit on this is 20 mile an hour on this downgrade. I wasn't doing a very good job of keeping to the speed limit later on this. You may see it later. I might have edited that bit out, as you do. So the speed, I'm still accelerating. I'm starting to apply the dynamic brake. Just to try and stop it accelerating. I don't appear to have been paying an awful lot of attention to this. I think I was being molested by cats at the time. If you look at the visual thing, you'll see that the bottom row of dots are all white because there's no air brakes applied. But you can see there's compression behind the engines now because the engines are pushing back against the whole train. So you've got 6,500 tons pushing those engines down the hill. So those couplers are in quite a bit of compression already, and it's only the start of it. The excitement builds. B4 B8 maximum dynamic brake. So we've got 50% braking on already. And more of our trains hitting the steep bit and pushing us forward. This display is similar to the other one, just a little bit different. I would wave my mouse, but you can't see my mouse pointer, so that doesn't work. So if you look at one of the screens, you'll see 90 and 90. One of those is the brake pipe, one of those is the equaliser reservoir. Under that smaller, you have another 90, which is the rear of the train. You've got a 0, which I can't read at the moment. You have 131, which is the pressure in the main brake reservoir. So that's your reserve of compressed air. And then to the right of that, you've got a white BC. Now that's the pressure in the brake cylinders for the locomotives. 73 kilopounds is the weight on the coupler, I think, for an SD70. B6 means I'm in dynamic braking as 6. Above that, forward for where the levers are positioned. Just to the right of the speedo, at the top, you'll see a little +1 to 0 to +1 to 0 to -1. That is the acceleration or deceleration of your train, of your lead locomotive. So that shows if it's a green 3, +3, then we're accelerating. If it's a yellow -3, we're decelerating. Right, I was getting towards the end of the dynamic brake, so I've applied the initial automatic brake. So you see all those 3 pressures have dropped to 84 now, so there's 6 psi of pressure. And if you look up at the visual aid thing, you'll see there's pressure all the way along the train, but not in the locomotives. Because in this simulator, this is run 8, it automatically bails the brakes. So if you apply dynamic braking, it'll let the air out of the brake cylinders in the locomotives so you don't lock the wheels. As far as I know, that's something that happens in the real world automatically on most locomotives. Doesn't seem to happen on TSW2. Whether that's a bug or whether that's because the AC44, whatever it is different, I do not know. Haven't been able to find out. It might be because the actual locomotive in the real world behaves different, I just don't know. So I've got a balance now between the dynamic brake and the other thing, the automatic brake, that's it. But and you can see there's a lot of compression on the couplers at the front of the train if you look at the visual aid. And you can see that all the whole length of the train, the air brakes are on, apart from the ends. Somewhere not too far from here, just about here, I come across a red light and I've basically got to go do an emergency brake, so I'll just hit everything and pray it'll stop, basically. And it did. And you'll see the strain of that in the visual thing, which I didn't look at because I was too busy thinking, please stop! So a fair bit of force on the train anyway. What I did was I put the automatic to full, I put the loco to full, I left the dynamics, and just thought, I do hope this stops. There's bound to be a better technique, but I don't know it. It worked, it stopped. So right, I've gone for full loco, I've gone for full automatic, and I'm just praying now. I can see an awful lot of strain in the couplers, an awful lot of compression in those couplers if you look at that visual box it. And because I've dumped all the air pressure, because I've gone to emergency braking, everything's gone dark, and it stops, even on a 2.4% downgrade or whatever it is. So now that I'm at a standstill, I can let the locomotive brake off, release some of the tension in the train. You can see the tension in the train moving already. Right, so I've disengaged the dynamic brake, which means that it's applied more air pressure to the locomotive brake now, to the what do you call it, the independent brake, that's the one. Right, okay, time to move on. I was held there for quite a while, but now we've got an amber, so I can start thinking about getting the train back in motion. 2 honks from the Book of Honk. That is the release the automatic brake and basically release all the brakes. Little bit of power to kick it off. End of train thing's lit up, so I know the whole train's moving. I can apply a bit more power and get the thing moving a bit, get the thing back up to speed now. Although since we're on a steep downgrade, I apparently decided, no, let's not do that. Let's just get into the dynamic braking and get things set up. I don't want to run away. It's weird watching you did a day ago. Right, so we've now got about probably about 20 minutes of balancing dynamic brakes and automatic brakes and hoping there aren't any more reds. And after that, the rest of the video is the rest of the journey, but in about 8 times normal speed, so it doesn't take too long. So I'm just applying the initial settings, the initial automatic brake again. And looking at the automatic thing up there, the train's still picking up speed, and looking at the indicator at the top there, I haven't actually got any automatic brake, and that's because the system was still recharging, it was still rebuilding air pressure. So I'm going to need to add more brake before I get any actual benefit from it, because there's nowhere in the cylinders yet. That's what happens with automatic braking systems. You don't get to brake 2 or 3 times without it changing the response. Every time you use them, the response gets worse unless you can let it recharge fully. And if you were driving it for real, or you were driving it from TSW, you'd be wondering why you weren't stopping, because you haven't got that visual aid up at the top. It's a nice cheat, but it's a good way of sort of showing you what the brakes do. I wouldn't normally drive with that on. So you can see there's a lot of strain on the locomotives because they're doing lots of dynamic braking, almost full, and there's a little bit of colour there, so there's a little bit of air braking going on, and I'm holding the speed, so I'm happy. But I had to go to a higher setting than I expected. And the way the brakes behave, it will depend the type of cars that you're towing, so the type of cargo you've got, the type of locomotives you've got, they all behave differently. The length of your train, it all affects the way the brakes behave. I don't think it's modelled, but as the brakes get hotter, they will behave differently. I've been told on one of the forums by a genuine real-life, they do exist, a real-life engineer, as in train driver, that if you've got a DC locomotive or an AC locomotive, the dynamic brakes behave totally different, but they couldn't tell me how they differ, they just do. So you wonder why every now and again a train runs away and falls off the end of the track at a bend. Most peculiar. And the final question for tonight is, why aren't red wine bottles bigger? Right, because I was almost maximum dynamic brake and was still on the steep slope, what I did there was I've had a little bit more automatic brake in the hopes that it'll start to slow the train down a bit more and I can release some of the dynamic brake and take some of the strain off the locomotives. The dynamic brake only acts on the locomotives, it does not act on the wagons themselves, because all it does is slow down the locomotive's wheels, so the locomotives do all the braking for the train with dynamic braking. They will not bring the train to a complete halt, they'll only slow it down. The last few mile an hour you need air brakes. What else? So they only act on the wheels, they don't bring you down to zero. The faster you're going, the less effect they have. So as you slow, they get more and more effective until you get close to like below 5 miles an hour, when they start to tail off again. Automatic brake acts on every single axle on the train, apart from those that have been bailed off because of dynamic braking. And the independent brake only acts on the locos, acts on the same axles as dynamic braking. So if you've got loco brake applied, if you've got independent brake applied and you start dynamic braking and it doesn't do anything automatically, you will lock the wheels, because you've only got the same amount of weight on the wheels, and 2 sets of brakes on one wheel just stops it turning and makes it skid. I think that sums it up quite nicely. Oh yeah, automatic brakes, you cannot reduce them slightly. Once you've applied them, all you can do is release them fully if you're in freight mode. Whereas dynamic brakes and independent brakes, you can feather them slightly, reduce them slightly without taking them off completely. So it's much more easier fine control using dynamic brakes or using the independent brake. You can't do that with the automatic brake, but the automatic brake uses every axle on the train, every braked axle. So if you look at the visual aid, you'll see that, okay, I've got dynamic braking working, so the locomotives are braking even though they're white. The brake cylinders aren't doing anything, that's why they're white, because they've been bailed off because I'm dynamic braking. The bottom row of dots is quite coloured because I've got automatic brake applied down to 80 psi, so that's 10 psi of braking. And then you can see the strain, the compression on the couplers towards the front of the train in the top row. The 4 E's on the left of the locomotives at the front of the train, and the one at the back is the tail end, Charlie, the rear gunner. What am I doing now? I've seen another red light, so I'm now applying full automatic brake to bring the train to a halt. I built up a hell of a traffic jam in front of me. There was about 30 or 40 trains all waiting to get going. So it's a lot of stop-start. That train to the right of us is on the same line as we are, taking the slightly less steep route. I know in the States you normally basically drive on the right on these rails. However, because that is the shallow one and you want people going up, you want trains to make it up the hill, so you put them on the shallow one, and the steeper one you leave for the brakes of the trains going down the hill. So they have a crossover earlier on in the route, and then somewhere after San Bernardino you do a swap round to get them back to the right side of the track if you can. So this part of it is left-hand drive, basically, left-hand running. Oh, please stop. That's not going to stop, is it? Is he going to stop? No. It's trying to stop. It didn't stop. One of the things I like about this cylinder, what do you call it? Simulator, is you don't end automatically on a spad. I've released all the brakes. Now, I'm doing a preview because I'm editing the video, but I'm pretty sure the red text it showed when I switched things at the top of the screen there said that was a stop and proceed signal, which means you stop, and then if it looks clear ahead, you proceed at restricted speed. You get a lot of them on this. I'm not quite sure, look at the signal, how you tell the difference between the stop and the proceed and a stop outright. There's a way to tell. It's something to do with yellow G signs or numbers or something, I don't know. But that was a stop and proceed, so it's not too bad that I passed it and I can continue. And continued till I see the train in front, basically. At restricted speed. Which is why I've got full dynamic brake applied at the moment, just to hold me back a bit. It'll accelerate and it will hopefully get to a speed it'll just sit at. Meanwhile, on the other line, a stacked train's going. If you look out the right hand window, heading towards Barstow. So I think I'm probably past the worst of the steep bit because the dynamic brake's holding the whole train back. I've got no air brakes applied. The speed, it's not accelerated too much. As I said at the start of this video, yes, this is not TSW2, this is a different simulator. The reason I'm using this simulator and not TSW2 on Soundpatch is because at the top of the screen there, towards the left hand side, you will see a visual aid type thing where you can see the strain or compression on the couplers, and you can see what the brakes are doing throughout the whole length of the train. Very useful aid to sort of describing how applying the brakes starts from the front and works its way to the back of the train. Or if you've got an engine at the back of the train as well, you'll see that any change to the braking on the train will start from both ends of the train and work its way into the middle. I could make life more complicated and stick some distributed power units into the middle of the train, and you'll see how it spreads out from them as well. But that's more of a Run 8 thing, and it's nothing to do with TSW. But this is a handy visual aid, and this little sort of tutorial for anybody that's new to train simming and US heavy freight. It applies to all the simulators wherever they are. If they model it, this is how the trains would behave in the real world, I believe. Right, that's the detailed tutorial out of the way. The rest of the video is basically just a run to the end of the trip, which took another couple of hours, all at 8 times normal speed. Just so you can see where I went if you're interested, or you can just stop the video now if you're not. That's the end of the steep bit where the up line joins the down line. There's some sort of hoppers going the other way. And I think that's probably enough talk.